But is that, I mean, it just feels such a risky strategy from their point of view. Like, even just the idea of creating a conspiracy theory about, there being a force behind the scenes who are billionaires and who are taking all your money. If people make that realization, or if if the same thing happens with fascism as happened last time, then then we go around in a circle with going through all these different.
Well, I think one of the sorry.
Yeah, I just want is it that? I mean, is it like Madeira? I presume the people in Madeira didn't really think about what they were doing; they just did it, and then that was the consequences. Are the people sort of who you say are behind this? Are they just doing it, and then they're thinking of the immediate rewards rather than it being a massive?
Well, some are just filling their boots.
Yeah.
The opportunity is there, and we'll just grab that opportunity with both hands. And we see this happening in America at the moment, big time. But some are much more strategic about it, and there's this recognition. It's long been realized that there's almost no relationship at all between evidence and practice in politics. There's a very interesting book published by two political scientists, Christopher Atchen and Larry Bartels, quite a few years ago now, called Democracy for Realists. And it says there's this folk theory of democracy, and the folk theory goes like this, that at every election, people get together and say, how well has this candidate performed over the past 4 or 5 years? Have they delivered on their manifesto? Have they improved my life? Have things materially got better for me or not? And let's weigh them against this other candidate who says they're going to do this, and we'll read the two manifestos. That has never happened. That's just not how politics actually works. That's how we want to believe it works. That's how the political pundits say it works. That's how the BBC says it works. It's not how politics works. They said the great majority of voters have no politically useful information whatsoever. None. Absolutely zero. They talked about this time when, I can't remember which US president who very nearly lost re-election because of shark attacks in Chesapeake Bay, and he was blamed for the shark attacks. And people vote on things which have absolutely nothing to do with political evidence, because we are so poorly informed, and that opens the door to liars. And so you get these pathological liars, like Boris Johnson, like Donald Trump, coming to power because they have discovered there's no penalties for lying, and there's everything to be gained by lying, because you can tell people whatever they want to hear.
Yeah. But see, like Boris Johnson seemed very surprised and like he was being sick in his mouth the day after Brexit happened. So it felt like that wasn't what he intended the results to be. So and then he ran with what happened.
Oh, of course, yeah.
It feels like they're just throwing bombs in there and seeing what happens and then picking up the pieces.
No, well, I mean, Boris Johnson has a very clear strategy in life, which is for Boris Johnson to be in charge.
Yeah.
And he thought he could game the Brexit vote in such a way that he could end up taking over the Conservative Party. You're quite right. He didn't expect the side he chose to win, but then, being the arch opportunist he's thought, maybe I could game this as well, and he did. And you know what the trouble is, with people who have no shame, is that they cannot be shamed. You can appeal to all the things that you would normally appeal to in politics. You can appeal to scruples, you can appeal to tradition, you could appeal to decency. But if people have none whatsoever, that becomes a political superpower.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I'd certainly seen with Trump, with Boo. Liz, you talk in the book about. What I love about the book is that it's a very clear argument, and you can follow it if you're like me. You have no idea about economics, and the argument does seem very solid, and it's a very readable book. But Liz Truss, of course, is neoliberalism sort of put into absolute practice.
Yeah, so Liz Truss was basically a creature of the Tufton Street junk tanks. Yeah. It wasn't just that her staff was fully populated by them, her mind was fully populated by them. She's a bit like Starmer in a way, in that she's got no convictions of her own. So she allowed these Machiavellian figures, you're all aware of these so-called think tanks in and around Tufton Street in Westminster, who refuse to reveal who funds them, but when you stumble across things, you find, oh, it's the tobacco companies, it's the oil companies, it's the big banks. Who knew? Who would have guessed? Anyway, and they're the people who are charged with getting the neoliberal agenda out there. And of course, the BBC and other media are only too happy to give it to them. I mean, one analysis found that the Institute of Economic Affairs alone was on the media 5,000 times the year before last. 5,000 times in the mainstream media. And, you know, they have massive media coverage. The media creates these monsters. I mean, not just the power of the junk tanks, but, you know, it created Boris Johnson, it created Nigel Farage, it created Jacob Rees-Mogg. They are creatures of not just the billionaire media, but also those who kowtow to the billionaire media, like the BBC. There's just endless, endless propaganda on their behalf. But Truss, in turn, was created by those junk tanks. Yeah. And all her sort of immediate circle had come straight out of Tufton Street and confidently told her, if you do these things, wonders will occur. We'll have a marvellous, glowing future for this country, and you will be hailed as the queen of all you survey. And she was stupid enough to say, great.
Yeah, well, I mean, the book's written before Trump's second term. How do you think? I mean, there is some optimism which we must get onto at the end of the book, which I'm not sure I share with you. but how's this Trump second administration shaping up in your eyes for this?
Yeah, well, you see, it's quite interesting because, you know, Trump, like everyone on the far right, is an opportunist. And you know, people look for ideology on the far right, but the far right always just plucks out whatever is useful to it. Because it is totally unscrupulous. It doesn't care what it chooses. It doesn't have any consistent philosophy. Just whatever it can be instrumentalized, can be made use of to sustain our power. And so he himself is a curious mixture of the ultra-neoliberal, rip down regulations, rip down government, destroy whole departments, especially highly inconvenient things like education. Can't be having any of that. Oh my God, people might see what's going on. So rip down all that, destroy environmental protections, destroy the tax base, stop taxing rich people, put all the economic burden onto poor people. All this is pure neoliberalism. But then he'll do something like trade tariffs. Which are very not neoliberalism. You know, neoliberalism and a particular form of globalization went hand in glove, and Trump runs counter to that stuff. They're still happy, you know, the Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025 and gave him his agenda in the same way that the Tufton Street mob gave Liz Truss hers. They're happy to go along with it because it's power. Yeah. They don't care, you know. After a while, it's like they cease to stick to the script, and it's just like, we're in charge now. Great, we'll go with the guy who's put us in charge. And so you can't say that Trump is himself a neoliberal, not entirely, but he is a product of neoliberalism, and in some respects, having become that product, he is much more neoliberal than anyone who went before him.
Mm-hmm. But so let's try and see if there's any way out of it, because it sort of feels like, you know, the world is moving. You know, I think just environmentally, which I know obviously is a big interest of yours, you know, everything feels like it's been left too late. But everything sort of seems to be moving towards, you know, unpleasantness, neoliberalism, and fascism, which are the two things we wouldn't want. How can we be optimistic about this, and what can we do?
So I think there are things, some of which can be learnt from neoliberalism and how they organised. You know, it's quite instructive because they were really good at what they did, and I think it was the first fully conscious political movement where they could game the future, where they could say, right, let's look at what's happened, what has made previous political movements successful. Doesn't matter what they were, whether they were Marxist, whether they were Nazi, whether they were social democratic. What were the determinants of their success? How can we take those determinants and apply them? And whether it's the long march through the institutions or whether it's brute power from the centre, we'll just bring them all together and make those work. And they're this long-term strategic plan. But also, crucially, they realised something absolutely fundamental, that to create political or religious change, you need a story. And it has to be a very simple, very straightforward story, and it has to follow a particular narrative structure that I call the restoration story. Now, people argue about how many basic plots there are, and some people say 3, some say 5, some say 7. It's always an odd number for some reason. But I think everyone agrees that one of them is this thing that Peter and I call the restoration story, which basically goes like this. The land has been thrown into disorder by powerful and nefarious forces working against the interests of humanity. But the hero or heroes will fight those powerful and nefarious forces against the odds, overthrow them, and restore harmony to the land. Right? This is the New Testament story, it's the Harry Potter story, it's the Lord of the Rings story, it's the Narnia. You've heard this story 1,000 times, right? But it's also the story which accompanies all successful political and religious transformations. Every one of them has deployed a restoration story. And the neoliberals were the first people to look at this coldly and say, we need a restoration story, how do we tell it? And they told it very simply. They said the land has been thrown into disorder by the powerful and nefarious forces of the overweening state, which by crushing individual liberty and collectivizing decision-making stifles the spirit of liberty and the spirit of enterprise. But the hero, the freedom-seeking entrepreneur, will fight this overweening state against the odds, overthrow it, and restore harmony to the land. And they told this story again and again and again. They had years in which to refine it. Now, a huge part of our mistake is that we didn't recognize the need for that, to create a new story of our own. And we hadn't done that research which they did. We hadn't done that sort of almost scientific exercise that they conducted to say what makes a political revolution work. And so, apart from all the other things we were missing, and there are quite a few, the fundamental, the crux of it that we were missing was this new narrative. And so when neoliberalism collapsed in 2008, we had our opportunity. This was when you strike the death blow, just like neoliberalism did in 1979. It struck the death blow for Keynesian social democracy. It came forward with this fully formulated philosophy, with a very clear narrative at the center of it, with answers to all the questions. And we got to 2008, the whole thing had fallen apart. Neoliberalism caused the collapse because of the deregulation of the banks, which was exactly what it had been demanding. And we said, maybe we can have a little bit less neoliberalism, or how about Keynesianism? That was a good idea. Yeah, we like that. But you can't go back. The capital had already found out how to destroy Keynesianism. And so one of the things that Peter and I have done is to say, right, what is our story? And we've refined it down, looking, drawing on what science tells us about what human beings are, which is a much better thing than neoliberalism has told us we are. We're actually much nicer, much better creatures than we've been persuaded we are. Drawing on also this really fundamental thing. So a few years ago, I did this exercise for myself because I thought, hang on a moment, why have I never asked myself this question? What are my values? What are the fundamental, irreducible values of this person here? And it's actually a really useful exercise to do. What are the things I put above everything else, I really value? And I went through them, and there were things like, community, family, friendship. They're generally a single abstract noun is how you describe a value. Honesty, altruism, empathy, things like this. These are values I hold in high esteem. I don't always live by them because we're all hypocrites, right? But, I hold them in high esteem. Now, which of these values is universally shared? Which will you find all the way from the far left to the far right across the political spectrum? And, there's frankly absolutely no point in going to the far right and say, how about empathy? Shall we all do some empathy? You guys? Well, we heard what Elon Musk has said about empathy, haven't we? You're just not going to win it that way. But the one value which everyone seems to have in common is belonging. Everyone has a powerful need for belonging, a powerful urge for belonging. Even psychopaths want to belong. They want to form a group of psychopaths that they can join. And one of the reasons why fascism is now so attractive, particularly to the young men, is that many young men have lost a sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. They feel alienated, they feel isolated, they feel that no one cares, they're not part of anything. And fascism comes along and says, hey, you could be just like us. You could wear the same uniform and chant the same slogans and march to the same drums and beat the same people up. And they say, whoa, fantastic, I've got a community. The only way we're going to draw people away from that form of belonging is to create a much better, inclusive form of belonging based on our own neighborhoods, but also based on what we know about our psychology. And so the story which Peter and I tell goes like this. The world has been thrown into disorder by the powerful and nefarious forces of neoliberalism, telling us that our highest purpose in life is to fight like stray dogs over a dustbin. But the heroes of this story, the working and the middle classes, will come together and rediscover our own good nature, that actually we are the uber-social mammals. We are the most community-oriented of all mammals, with the possible exception of the naked mole rat. But we are, we stand together or we fall apart. And building on this, we will create a politics of belonging, where our neighbours become part of our community. We build genuine communities where we start to control local resources and, through participatory, deliberative democracy, local decision-making as well. We create vibrant, meaningful communities where everyone can belong. And in doing so, we roll back the forces of neoliberalism and fascism. Against the odds, we overthrow them and we restore harmony to the land.